Okay, so part one of the book, chapter two, introduces us to our main character, Natalie, and describes her life in her contemporary, current situation. And as I got to know Natalie more and more, I started to revise some of my predictions about what's going to happen the rest of the book. And the reasons for this is throughout the first chapter, we start to get to know her, and she's actually positioned as somewhat irredeemable. So her, she's resentful, she's bitchy, she's narcissistic and self-involved, she's not a good mother, she's just like really hateful, and you can see that through the interaction with the woman who she meets up with in Target, the way that she treats and regards her kids and her husband, and then the fact that her husband was having an affair with the nanny, which is like sort of slid in under the rug as a plot point. So I thought at first that maybe our main character was simply going to have to become less obedient in order to be redeemed. And I think that is still the case, but it's funny, as I was reading the first chapter, I just didn't like this character at all, and I didn't really care what happened to her. I found the character to be somewhat flat and not nuanced, because there was very little to be redeemed about her other than just this constant onslaught of bitchiness. And I was just really disappointed actually in this book, because I thought that we were going to be encountering not a very nuanced character. And then as we got into part two, I started to actually become a little bit more hopeful, because through the sort of the parallel story structure, where you're seeing the character Natalie explore her new environment in the 1800s, and then you're also getting the backstory from explaining how she kind of got to be the way she is. Then you start to have a little bit more empathy for her and the really, really flawed anti-hero that she's positioned to be in the beginning of the book. And so I'm finding that as a really effective device. It's you basically set up the story and you break it in two, and there's two parallel stories happening simultaneously, and they inform each other. And I actually think it's done really well so far. So, you kind of see that actually Natalie came from a really broken home, and her attempt to address a traumatic childhood is to basically fix it as an adult. And the author, I think, is telling us that maybe she hasn't examined that very well, and as a result her attempts to fix it are creating other problems for herself. So I think we'll see how effectively the character becomes likable, nuanced, dynamic, round. And we'll kind of have to read on to see how that happens. But the way that they describe her time in college and the way that she's exposed to cultures that she was never exposed to as a childhood, I think the author does a really effective job, especially the scene where her college roommate is hooking up with someone and she's actually describing it as though she's feeling like she's being assaulted. And that actually, I felt that character really honestly did feel that way. And to experience such an intense shock to your morals and values in a world that's outside of your own, it seems like she really did sustain some lasting trauma. So, we'll have to read on to kind of see how things, progress. But I'm actually thinking that she's probably going to find a way to obviously fall in love with Mr. Olden Time Caleb. Of course she would. It's a chick lit book, so duh. And I think it's going to be really steamy, because I'm sure he's the opposite of the current day Caleb. Olden Time Caleb is going to be masculine and sets boundaries with her and holds her accountable to the standards of a marriage. And I think that what's going to happen is she's going to come back into the new time, and she's going to realize that there are traditions that are worth keeping up, but she was actually just not as aligned with truth as she thought she was.